Hello, and for the second time this week, welcome to an emergency edition of the CHGO Fire Podcast. This CHGO emergency pod is presented by Indeed. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ALLCITY. That's Indeed.com/ALLCITY. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. I'm Alex Campbell. Hello again. If you're a loyal CHGO soccer podcast listener for the third day in a row in what has been just an absolutely absurd week, despite the fact that there's not been a single game to talk about played by any Chicago professional soccer teams. And I'm joined by our good friend and the guy who initially broke the news of the day that Xherdan Shaqiri is no longer a member of the Chicago Fire. Alex Calabrese, good to see you. Thanks as always for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me on and putting this together on short notice. It's been a chaotic couple of hours in Chicago, and it might not be done yet, but for now, Xherdan Shaqiri, that's the news of the day.
Yeah, we'll touch on this briefly later. The MLS transfer window does close tonight, so there is still a few more hours left for teams to do things. This, of course, allows the Fire to, if they wanted to add another player to their roster, they could. They have not had any flexibility whatsoever. But yes, Xherdan Shaqiri is out. The news of the day that he and the Chicago Fire have agreed to a mutual contract termination. That was kind of the only way it seemed like, Alex, that Shaqiri was going to leave the Fire before the end of the season. Can you run us through real quick? How did we get to this point where Shaqiri is voluntarily leaving money on the table and the Fire are allowing him to leave for nothing?
Yeah, so there's one aspect of it which we have to remember is that for most of this season, it was looking very likely that come the summer transfer window, teams were going to have a second buyout. But then when the MLS Board of Governors met around the All-Star game, they decided no second buyout, which completely took that option off the table. Obviously, it was an open secret. The Fire were trying to find a new team for Shaqiri, trying to find a solution to get him off the books before the end of his contract at the end of the season. And that didn't happen. Nothing materialized. So now I guess pretty much with 12 hours to go until the transfer window slams shut, they finalized the paperwork. It was all approved that it would be a mutual contract termination. And this means essentially it opens a roster spot that if in these final hours they do want to sign someone, which on the domestic market they still can, but they don't have a DP slot until next season based on the way the rules work. It's a bit complicated, but so hypothetically they wouldn't really be able to sign a DP right now, but they'll have an open DP slot in the offseason and potentially two open DP slots because Gaston Jimenez, who's a DP, can be bought down to be a TAM player again.
Yeah, basically to not get too into the weeds of it, the Fire are effectively using what is a new roster mechanism of MLS that was recently instituted that instead of 3 DPs and 3 U22 initiative spots, you could do 2 and 4. So that's basically where the Fire's roster is now. So they could sign a U22 initiative player if they wanted to. They can also do plenty of roster accounting to try to save some money. They could just elevate somebody from the second team. The name that's been battered around by fans the most is Omar Glasgow because he is out of short-term agreements he can use this season. So this would be a way to get him into the picture if they chose to do so. But yeah, I think you kind of covered the basics there. The Fire couldn't find a buyer, which isn't surprising given the fact that they had absolutely no leverage and Shaqiri's wages are insane. Even if the buyout had been on the table, I don't think eating something along the lines of $2 million would have been exactly preferable from the Fire's perspective or something they would have wanted to do. And so now they get out of it without having to spend that money and pay that money out. Shaqiri gets to presumably sign somewhere in Europe as a free agent. Do we have any idea where that's going to be at this point, or is it kind of anyone's guess where he ends up over the course of, say, the next month?
It's really difficult to say, and it might not even be done by the end of the month because right now he's staying in Chicago, I think, for at least a couple of days. There's no rush for a solution because he's a free agent before the transfer window closed. He can sign anywhere whenever he wants as long as the league doesn't have a registration deadline. Like, for example, the German league, the Bundesliga, has a registration deadline at the same time as the transfer deadline, so you couldn't sign there in the middle of September. But the Premier League or other leagues, you can just sign as a free agent pretty much any time up until the end of January. So we'll see what happens. Some leagues will offer more money than others. It really depends on where his head is at. If he wants a bigger contract, I think you would see him end up in Turkey or something like that. If he doesn't care that much about that, I think there's a decent chance he ends up back in Switzerland. But at this point, this is all kind of moot for the Fire. He's no longer a Fire player. He's off the books. He's a free agent, and his career is now in his hands.
So if we wind the clock back a couple of years when the Fire made this signing, there was some excitement around it. It felt like the sort of move that the Fire, at least under Georg Heitz up to that time, hadn't really made. It seemed like an opportunity for Shaqiri to be the guy. I guess the question I'm getting towards here is, in hindsight, should we have known that this was going to be a total and complete disaster, or is this a fairly blameless situation, do we think, in terms of that it made sense at the time and then just simply did not work out?
I think it made sense at the time. It was the answer. It was the response of Georg Heitz to Lorenzo Insigne signing for Toronto FC, and that was a couple of months period there where a lot of those like absurdly big names compared to MLS were coming in a short period of time. And Shaqiri, on paper, it seemed like it might have worked, but I think the way he was used, the team he had around him, the way they tried to shoehorn him into that number 10 role, it just never really worked out in the end. I don't think it's entirely his fault. I don't think it's entirely the Fire's fault, but it just didn't work out for a variety of reasons. And but it made sense at the time. Maybe you could have gone for someone with more upside, someone who might have more incentive. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's entirely his fault. I don't think it's entirely the Fire's fault that things didn't work out. It just wasn't the right fit at the right time, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'll touch on Insigne here in a minute because I feel like his salary and the number that he came in at kind of warped the entire MLS salary market briefly and probably gave Shaqiri's camp some leverage. Because, I mean, the cons, if we want to do the revisionism, he was getting up there in age already. The last team he was in every game starter for before coming to the Fire was that doomed Stoke City team in 2017, 2018. That was just an absolute total train wreck because, of course, then he went and was a rotation piece, a bench player at Liverpool, then basically didn't play for Lyon at all. And the Fire still paid $7.5 million for him. I think more than the salary, I think that transfer fee in hindsight is the sillier part because it's, he really didn't have much of a market at that point. But I will run through here briefly. This is in 2024. These are the highest paid players in Major League Soccer. Note base salary and guaranteed because they're often quite different numbers. Number one is, of course, Lionel Messi. He makes $12 million a year with a guaranteed compensation of $20.5 million. He is in his own tax bracket. Lorenzo Insigne, still hanging out in second place. Base is 7.5. Guaranteed this year, $15.4 million, which we could come on to discuss which contract is worse, but that has not been a good contract either. Third place is Sergio Busquets, guaranteed 8.5, base 8.5, guaranteed 8.8. Fourth place is Xherdan Shaqiri, $7.4 million. He was guaranteed $8.2 million this season. Will not be getting all of that, of course, due to today's buyout. And then there's a pretty big drop off after him because fifth place is Austin FC Sebastian Driussi, who makes about $3 million less in base, $4.5 million, with a guarantee of 6.7. So let's go there, Alex. Maybe this is too soon to say, but Xherdan Shaqiri, worst signing in MLS history. Where does he rank? Who else is in that conversation of signings and contracts that have been anywhere near this bad?
I mean, for me, I don't think you can say he's the worst signing in MLS history. I think it's a guy who came to the same club in the same transfer window, and that's Jairo Torres. I think it's impossible to. I mean, even looking around the league, I don't think there's a single transfer in the history of the league worse than a guy who is a attacking midfielder, winger, forward type thing, and didn't score a single goal in 2 full seasons. Like, that's for me the worst. And then Rafa Marquez, if you want to go back a little bit, was also a pretty disastrous signing considering the money that they paid for him. But still, it is a big disappointment. It is a big flop, and he's definitely a more high-profile name than Jairo Torres, so maybe more recognizable disappointment to the fans. But it's really hard to look past the guy who came in pretty much at the same time as him, in the same team, in the same transfer window, who scored 0 goals and maybe got 1 assist, I think. But still,
there might have been 1 assist late on in his time in like a complete bonus game that like when
I
at the
think
end of last
so.
season where they were kind of out of it. No, that's a good shot. Yeah, Jairo Torres as the Fire's second foray, I suppose, into the young DP category because shall we not forget Mr. Nacho ALLCITY is also probably one of the lousier signings in MLS history. It was funny. Our head man over here at CHGO, Kevin Kadick, this morning had a tweet that said, any discussion about the worst signings in Chicago sports history has to start with this guy. And I think that's like a legitimate argument. Like, is Xherdan Shaqiri the worst? Like, not truly a free agent because they paid a transfer fee, but is he just kind of the worst brand new guy brought in signing, brand new player brought in signing in Chicago sports history? I mean, he's got to be up there. I mean, the Bears have done some pretty dumb things, but like,
We're not counting
know.
like #1 draft pick, right?
No. So but Andrew Benintendi on the White Sox this year is going to probably be dead last among qualified baseball players in F4, although he's hitting in a way that's trying to get him out of it. But no, it's one of those things that this was an all-time bad contract. Like there's simply no way around that. Before we get to a break in a few minutes, I do though, Alex, want to talk about his numbers a bit. And I honestly forgot how much soccer Xherdan Shaqiri played in his first 2 seasons with the Fire because it felt like he didn't play that much. But 2022, 29 games, 7 goals, 6 assists. Not great, but like not the worst thing you've ever seen. 2023, 28 games, 5 goals, 4 assists. So just from mediocre to less than that. And then, my God, this year, 12 games, 2 goals, 1 assist. He has missed 13 games for the Fire this year up until this point, many of them of recent note. He last played for the Fire on May 18th. That was a home loss to the Columbus Crew before he then left like 2 weeks early for Switzerland duty. Doing the math, Alex, that is a goal or assist every 202 minutes. And no, I am not including MLS assists because those aren't a real stat.
So, first things first, the numbers you gave are dramatically inflated because in 2.5 seasons, he scored 6 goals from the run of play.
Right.
Not including penalties or free kicks. He scored 6 goals. And two of them were against Inter Miami in the same game. So do with that information what you will as well. But he scored 6 goals from the run of play in 2.5 seasons. And that's really not what you're wanting from a guy of his quality. And the other thing is, you talked about how much soccer he played. He did play a lot. He barely missed any games due to injury. It's not like the Jairo Torres situation where he was perennially injured. Shaqiri has played. He's been healthy most of the time. Yes, he had some minutes restrictions before the World Cup and stuff like that, but he's mostly been healthy. He's mostly been available, and he just hasn't put up the numbers at all. And part of the reason for that is he was never benched. Ezra Hendrickson and then Frank Klopas kept him in the starting lineup even when he wasn't playing well. He wasn't actually benched for tactical reasons, not injury, not fitness, not rotation. He wasn't actually properly benched until actually his last game, the Columbus game, where he was put on the bench, and then a couple days later he went to the Euros. Now ended up being his last game. So yeah, he was mostly in the starting lineup for most. He was in the starting lineup for pretty much his entire time with the club. Though there were some times like coming back from international duty kind of thing, he'd be on the bench. But other than that, he was in the starting lineup when they could put him in the starting lineup every time.
We'll reminisce some more about the highs and the lows of the Xherdan Shaqiri era and talk about what's next right after a quick break to thank some folks who make this show possible. CHGO Fire is brought to you, as always, by Coors Light. Chicago, when you choose to chill, it's the perfect time to reach for an ice-cold Coors Light. I'm sure Xherdan Shaqiri will be doing a lot of chilling in the days and months to come. I'm sure Chicago Fire fans are feeling a bit more chill now that Xherdan Shaqiri is no longer on the soccer team they support. There's plenty of other reasons, though more positive reasons, shall we say, to embrace a chill mindset this summer, whether you're taking a break from the heat, whether you're enjoying this lack of heat we've had lately, just spending some time outside with friends. When you choose to chill, that is when it is the time to reach for an ice cold Coors Light. When the Coors Light mountains turn blue on the bottles and cans, it means the beer inside is as cold as the Rockies. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smoother finish. When you embrace a chill mindset, it's a good time to choose chill and crack open a Coors Light. Coors Light is mountain cold refreshment, crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. Make the most out of the times you choose to chill and choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/CHGO Soccer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. CHGO Fire is also brought to you by our friends at Shady Rays, a longtime favorite sponsor around here. They've got so much selection to choose from with different styles, different colors, no matter what you're looking for, no matter what summer adventures still await you. Shady Rays has a pair of premium polarized shades for you that won't break the bank. They've been rated 5 stars by over 300,000 satisfied customers. Their shades have durable frames and crystal clear optics. They are the perfect choice whatever you are up to the rest of this summer. Shady Rays also has a ridiculous guarantee that if your shades are lost, if they're broken, they will replace those shades at a huge discount. I was helped out by that earlier this summer when a pair I'd owned for a couple years broke. They offered me some great deals on other new shades as well. And the guarantee isn't just if you lose your shades or break your shades. There's also a 30-day return worry-free guarantee if you do not love your new pair of Shady Rays. So no matter what, there's no risk when you shop. Their team always has your back with personal and fast support. Exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal of the season. Head to shadyrays.com and use code CHGO for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. All right, Alex, the Xherdan Shaqiri era, it is over. Let's discuss how we might remember the Swiss International's time in the Windy City. A couple highlights or lowlights or memorable moments. You mentioned the Miami game last year. Probably the best he's ever performed against what was a completely hapless, messyless Miami squad with his 2 goals. I will also always remember his comments after about how important it is to get your designated player signings right and how much weaker a team can be without them. Also trolled Miami a bit for maybe not following the rules. So that was, I think, a fun example that, Shaqiri, for as kind of mysterious a character as he often was, like he was a guy who was not just he I think wanted to be more than the player he was and was, tuned in more than maybe it seemed he was, but whether it was mentally or physically, it just never translated onto the field.
No, I mean, he was really frustrated throughout his tenure with himself. I mean, he wanted to succeed here. It wasn't an issue with him not trying. That's the thing I think people from the outside watching the games might miss that you would see close up is that he really did care. He did want to succeed. It just didn't happen, unfortunately. And yeah, you mentioned the Miami game interview with him after. That was an all-time interview. There's so much went on in that probably a story for later, but that was a really fun one. The Miami game is really the only marquee moment he got, if we're being honest with you. But there are a couple of other memories that I think people will remember. That goal he scored against Montreal last season, which got nominated for the Puskás Award, which is probably the only Fire player to ever be nominated for the Puskás Award, and probably will be the only one because I can't imagine that that's happening anytime soon. But here's the thing. A lot of the times he played well, it's not it didn't show up on the score sheet. Like there were a lot
Right.
of games where you're there in person and you really feel like he's taking over the game, but it's not like that's showing up in the final third. Like the game against St. Louis last season, where it was the 1-0 win where Rafael Schihos scored. I thought that was one of his best games I've seen him
Mhm.
play for the Fire, but it didn't show up because he didn't score. But I thought he completely took over that game, dominated the midfield, just playing passes left, right, and center. And there were a couple of games like that where I thought he really did show his quality in bits and pieces, but that did not show up with his goal tally because he didn't score a single goal from the run of play this season. So,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
he
it was
scored
also
more
just
for
never
Switzerland than for
consistent
the Fire.
enough. Yeah,
Mhm.
it was just never consistent enough. Yeah, he always looked
Like
good
you
for
could you
Switzerland,
could
but it
get
just wasn't
that version
consistent.
I'm talking about of him in one game, and then 3 days later he disappears. Like the Miami game where he scored 2 goals, easily his best game. 3 days later, he was completely anonymous against Charlotte as the Fire were pretty much dumped out of the playoffs there and then. And there was a game against Red Bull earlier this year where it ended 0-0, but I thought he played quite well. And then the next week, he was absolutely shocking. I believe it was RSL. So it was just too inconsistent. He would just go missing for long periods of time when the team wasn't playing well. But again, like I said, it's not that he wasn't trying. I don't want that to be the narrative. But it
Right.
didn't work out, and it's at the end of the day still a bust.
All right, so now what? You mentioned, the Fire should have 2 open designated player spots this offseason. Hugo Kuipers and Gaston Jimenez are the remaining DPs on the books, but we expect that Jimenez's contract will be bought down and changed again. In terms of the needs, number 10 winger, number 8, if you're the new sporting director, where are you starting, where are you focusing your efforts in terms of using those unlimited salary roster spots to try to get this team off the bottom of the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, so now when whoever's the new sporting director who comes in the offseason, whoever it may be, whether that's combined with the head coach position or not, they're going to have 2 designated player signings that they can make. So realistically, in my opinion, assuming you keep Brian Gutierrez to play the number 10 position, you go out and get a DP winger and a DP number 6 or number 8 to partner with Kellen Acosta. Those are the 2 top priorities. If I were putting on the sporting director hat, that's what I would do. That's probably what the Fire will do also. But yeah, I think those are the main positions to watch in the offseason. You're not going to see you're not going to see a DP today. I'll just say it.
No.
If there's a signing today before the summer deadline for the rest of this season, it'll probably be a left back, backup left back, because Chase Gasper's out for a while. But the clock is ticking on that. There are 6.5 hours left. So obviously, we'll keep an eye on that. But no, in the offseason, Gaston will probably be bought down to TAM. And yeah, probably a winger is the top priority, and then a midfielder to sit next to Kellen Acosta.
You mentioned Brian Gutierrez, who is the guy who's picked up a lot of minutes, although he has still been rotated out a couple times because his performance has been inconsistent. Assuming he's going to get his chances down the stretch here, this kind of feels like a do or die moment for Guti the rest of this season, because if he's not showing that he can be a productive MLS starting number 10, maybe a new sporting director is looking to replace him. It feels like he's really got to put a good run of games together here, because even though he's still so young, there's not going to be infinite chances for him to show he's the guy. He at some point just kind of has to do it, and this feels like it's going to be the last best chance he's probably going to get.
Yeah, and I think that's I think he's gonna prove himself right now. I think this is his moment. Whenever Shaqiri's gone away for the national team or whatever, Guti's been able to play through the middle as a number 10, and that's when he's been the best always. And right when Shaqiri went away last time for the Euros, right there and then is where Guti stepped up and played his best soccer of the season for a couple of weeks there. Now he's going to have that confidence. He's going to be able to play in his natural position every single week, right? Beginning of this
Right.
season and the last 2 seasons, his best position is the number 10, but he was being pushed out onto the wing in a weaker position, in a position that he had never played before 2021 in his career. As a young player, he never, ever, ever played as a winger, and he had to learn that position because Shaqiri had a lock on the number 10 position. So now he can play his true role where he's always played his best soccer, and he'll have that confidence knowing that he has the keys in that position. He is the guy. The team will run through him in the attack, and that has always, always, always been when he's at his best. So I think in terms of individual Fire players, the biggest winner from today's news that Shaqiri is leaving is Brian Gutierrez.
Yeah, it has to be. And that's just one example of, I think, many that this has got to lift a weight off of people's shoulders, I think, a bit, because this has just been hanging over the club in a weird way for months at this point. I guess one last interesting thing to ponder, Alex. Do we make anything of this news coming 2 days after Georg Heitz announced he would be leaving at the end of the season? Heitz could have announced that at any time. Do we think this is just a total coincidence, or is this Heitz making sure he at least feels like he has cleaned up what was probably the biggest single mess he made in his time here? And it's on his watch that the Shaqiri era is ended.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to speculate without knowing what's going through Heitz's head here, but I do think that with the transfer window coming to an end here in the summer, yes, there are still 9 games left. Yes, the Fire are still technically 3 points out of a playoff spot, which is weird. But with the Fire they still do have a season, but it really does feel like they're in a sitting duck situation here where lame duck, where you really want to you're just kind of moving on at this point, moving on from Shaqiri, moving on from Georg Heitz. Obviously, they're still in a playoff race right now, so they're not going to say it, but it does feel like we're kind of in a situation where very, very soon it's going to be everything is geared toward next season now, and they're really looking for that sporting director and getting that deal over the line for whoever they end up choosing to go with there. And then possibly a new head coach as well will come along with that. So, yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it is awkward. It feels like everybody's pushing to try to make the playoffs, but also everybody, including the guys who are out of contract and Klopas, and everybody kind of knows that the house is getting cleaned when this is all over. So, yeah, it's a bit of an odd time, I'd imagine, to be in Bridgeview and be around the Fire. Before we get out of here, got to plug that we've got a pretty big event coming up for the Fire's next home game, which is against Inter Miami. It is their second game back from this long break. The official CHGO Fire takeover. First time we're ever doing a full takeover. That is the Fire against Inter Miami. Messi and friends, hopefully all fit and in attendance. We're going to get things started at 5:30 p.m. with the tailgate. Details on that to come. There are tickets available to watch the game with a group of us. There are discounts if you are a diehard. It's a great reason if you needed one to sign up to be a CHGO diehard. So keep an eye out on the CHGO and CHGO Fire social handles for more news about that. Alex Calabrese, always great to have you on. This was a crazy day, has been a crazy day in the world of the Chicago Fire. Maybe it's not quite over yet. Where can people find what you are up to over at Men in Red 97?
Yeah, so the most important thing is to follow me on Twitter or X, Calabrese12. Just my name, AM, and my last name, 12. And also at Men in Red 97. And if anything happens today, well, maybe you'll hear it from me, and I will post it on that platform. So keep an eye out. But of course, in the coming days and weeks, we'll have more Fire coverage as they look to apparently make the playoffs. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, always a pleasure to be on the show here. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely, yes. Chicago Fire at NYCFC is in 10 days. And we will see what happens between now and then as the officially Shaqiri-less Chicago Fire head down the stretch. That's going to do it for the second emergency podcast of the week here on CHGO Fire. Thanks, everybody, for listening and taking extra time to tune into the show this week. I think we're done with the crazy news, at least for now. I can't imagine what else would happen that would trigger one of these, but who knows? Keep your eyes out for more CHGO Fire content. Next normal episode is on the 27th. Hopefully see a bunch of you out there for the takeover on the 31st. Shout out to Sarah behind the scenes for making this possible today. I'm Alex Campbell. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
We all silly like the mayor.